Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Wired's Crypto Podcast. I'm your host, Lianna, and I'm very happy to introduce our guest for today, Jonathan Hargreaves, Global Head of Business Development and ESG at Elastos. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi there, I'm pleased to be here.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Today, we're taking a closer look at the third anniversary of Bitcoin being used as official money in El Salvador. We'll explore how Bitcoin has affected El Salvador's economy, how Salvadorans feel about it, the government's current views. We'll also discuss its impact on global relations and what the future might hold for Bitcoin in the country. So, Jonathan, maybe we could start off with how you got into Bitcoin or cryptocurrency.
Sure. This is a very exciting subject for me. I've actually been involved in blockchain since, and the idea of Web3 since around about 2011, when I've been working quite intensively with organizations using the blockchain to try to create new models for Web3 approaches, Web 3.0 as it was called at the time. And the idea really being that the blockchain can create a new level of transparency and trust within the global economic system. So for the last couple of years, I've been working as you say, as head of growth at Elastos, and actually driving this idea that the Bitcoin can be used as a currency to actually address the crisis in credit that the world is facing. So the idea is that just as after the Second World War, when Europe was trying to rebuild itself, there was a credit crisis. And at the time, a conference in Bretton Woods was held, and it was decided to make gold the reserve currency that would help underwrite the rebuilding of the credit system. And really what we see at Elastos is using our technology, which is merged by with Bitcoin, this ability to create a new Bretton Woods. So use it to create liquidity to address the credit crisis that currently is affecting the whole world. And that's not just countries in Latin America and Africa, but actually even within economies such as the US, where up to 22% of the population don't have a credit score or credit rating. So that's a really important driver for us and for me, because I think we can use blockchain combining with cryptocurrencies to address major problems in the world, and that's really how I've been involved and why I'm so passionate about this sector. El Salvador being really an unusual example of an ambitious approach to embracing this opportunity.
Yeah, could you maybe explain why El Salvador decided to use Bitcoin as official money, and what were they hoping to achieve? Because I remember there were two sides of the coin, as it were, right? There was one camp that said it was a really bad idea, and then another camp that said it was a really good idea. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I think the main point here is not really a black and white issue in that context. So, to explain, El Salvador actually abandoned its local currency starting in 2001, and by 2004 had fully adopted the dollar as its main current official currency and currency of legal tender. So that was driven by a really urgent need to prevent hyperinflation and create stability within its economy, and an issue that the credit crisis I referred to has impacted in many developing countries. And it was a very specific choice to adopt the dollar. One of the issues with dollarization is obviously the control of your economy essentially becomes controlled by the US. So and there's nothing wrong with that, other than the fact that the currency policy and monetary policy becomes dictated by the needs of the US, not the needs of a country like El Salvador. So there are downsides to achieving that stability, and part of that is it kind of inhibits growth and creates a problem actually with the government controlling its economy on its own. So it's really important to understand that context, that actually the dollar is the official currency, and in 2021 the El Salvadorian government took the decision to adopt Bitcoin in conjunction. So, and what this means is it means that the government in El Salvador has an added ability to be able to manage its monetary policy using Bitcoin, as opposed to just relying on the dollar. So it gives it a greater flexibility and a greater ability to react to events and situations that are uniquely local to El Salvador. Now, one of those issues was, in fact, the fact that a million El Salvadorans actually live in the US and actually send remittances from the US to El Salvador. So these, for instance, have very high transmission fees and costs attached with it. So, originally, that was a very clear benefit that people of El Salvador could get from having the ability to transact in Bitcoin. So yeah, it was really this combination of giving that greater flexibility to the economy and trying to pioneer the rebuilding of confidence in the El Salvadorian economy, which also went hand in hand with greater efforts to and successful efforts to recreate law and order in terms of some of the criminal elements that you find it in some of these societies. So that was the overall driving goal for adopting Bitcoin.
I really love how you gave it so much more context as well, on why El Salvador decided to use Bitcoin as official money. How has using Bitcoin impacted El Salvador's economy? Have there been any noticeable improvements or problems, you think?
So in the first instance, it's definitely allowed the stability and inflation to manage within El Salvador. So currently this year, the inflation's at 0.9% and the economy is growing at 2.6%. So I think that's a reflection. 2.6% is not a huge number for a developing economy, but I think it reflects that stability. And two areas where this stands out really is that the president has acknowledged is, first of all, it's driven tourism and foreign investment into El Salvador, and that has obviously most clearly been represented by Bitcoin Beach, an area where you have seen thriving businesses and a kind of new kind of Bitcoin economy being created, and all these things I think help to support kind of more stable view of the El Salvadorian economy. So that's definitely one positive, and I think reflects this need for greater flexibility that we talked about. But I think at the same time, if you look at the hard figures, only around 10% of the population actually are currently using Bitcoin to transact, and that was one of the goals, which was a lot of the population really didn't have a bank account, as in many Latin American countries. People have bank accounts, but they don't necessarily use them, or they don't have them at all. So from that context, there's still a huge amount to do in terms of helping people within El Salvador basically create access to the financial system and financial inclusion. So I do think that being realistic in terms of the goals, there's still a long way to go to fully enable the population to engage with Bitcoin.
And how do you think they feel about using Bitcoin? Have their spending habits or opinions changed? I mean, I know you mentioned like only 10% of the population are using Bitcoin, but has that rippled out into the wider public?
So I think the key issue really is education, and one of the reasons why under the dollar system the economy struggled potentially was that there was a lack of an understanding of the dollar and how it worked. And if we're being candid, I think there's still a lot more understanding to be built around how can Bitcoin work for the ordinary person within El Salvador. So whilst businesses and at that macro level there may be confidence, at the more individual level, it's been a slower process than that might be expected. So to come back to the point on remittances, currently as I say, 26% of the economy comes from remittances from the US. So that's money paid from people, El Salvadorans living in the US to the local economy. And the vast majority of that is not being transacted in Bitcoin right now. So the downside on that is the sort of fees and costs that are being paid, essentially going to out of the country to bankers and other kind of intermediaries. That saving has yet to be fully realized. That's not to say that it can't be. And obviously, the fact that the 10% of the population have adopted this is actually an encouraging sign that this can move into a much more mainstream approach. But as I say, there needs to be more sustained education. Although it's the third anniversary, it's quite a radical change to impose Bitcoin. So I think the government in El Salvador is very aware that there's a need for this, continued education and increased use of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, I mean, I did say just 10%, right? But then 10% of the population is a lot, right? And I think education is just so key, and I'm so glad you brought that up. And I think everywhere as well, for mass adoption, there really needs to be, good education on this, right? How and what does the Salvadoran government think about the Bitcoin experiment now? Are they planning any changes to their approach? Are they putting in more education programs out there?
Yeah. So if the current president Bukele will be actually in office until 2029, and this was his strategy in the first place. So it very much is, as you say, a focus on education and making sure that the population understands the benefits of Bitcoin. One of the things that obviously happened in that 3 years is Bitcoin was at its high when the strategy was first announced. It obviously fell to the bottom of the bear market, which clearly would have impacted people's savings, and people were given a $30 amount to open a Bitcoin account when the strategy was launched. In the meantime, Bitcoin has actually risen and is now actually above the point it was then. So people actually have made money, and there are instances, obviously, of taxi drivers and certain businesses, really making great success around by the adoption of Bitcoin. But I think the key thing is further education. So we talked about this need for understanding the role of Bitcoin as providing credit and accessing international credit markets, which is one of the product and policies that we follow as Elastos. If you look into even a country like Brazil, a farmer in Brazil paying 90% interest on a loan to begin their farming, right? So in that context, that's a huge economic burden. And if you can use Bitcoin and Bitcoin markets using some of the technologies that are evolving right now around layer 2, what we call Bitcoin layer 2 technologies, it means you can access lending and credit at terms much more advantageous, closer to 14%. So the development of those kind of as more sophisticated Bitcoin services is something that has huge potential, and the El Salvadoran government are clearly focused on that. One of the things they've been doing actually recently is buying Bitcoin, one Bitcoin a day, and they will continue to do that. And I think there again, it shows that obviously that helps as Bitcoin grows, that will help grow the El Salvadorian economy and help kind of create that liquidity that I mentioned that's in such short supply in many countries around the world. So that's the continuation of that policy. It is important. Now, obviously, one of the issues with Bitcoin is at what level will it peak in this current sort of emerging bull run? It's obviously increased quite a lot to reach levels it was at previously. But the question is, how much more will it increase? Because that will have a huge impact on this whole strategy for El Salvador. And then I think that the next question is how can there are definite technologies emerging, such as stablecoins within the Bitcoin environment. It gets a bit technical, but what that means is you can start to offset some of the volatility of Bitcoin. And again, that's something that the governments, not just in El Salvador, but around the world, are really experimenting with.
Yeah, we had a conversation with Visa the other day on the payment evolution, right? And I think the future is looking really exciting. And how has the Bitcoin move affected El Salvador's relationship with other countries and global financial institutions?
Well, as I mentioned, it's definitely increased foreign investment coming into the country, and it's clearly offering new potential to international financial companies. Interestingly, MasterCard, not Visa, but MasterCard, have a non-custodial Bitcoin product, credit card product, which they will be launching. So you're exactly right. It really is the drive for financial inclusion that's also coming from those larger financial institutions that has the most potential to really kind of bootstrap, as I say, not just this education process, but the actual use of Bitcoin within El Salvador and other countries that may be able to access the international credit market that Bitcoin potentially creates.
Yeah, thanks for that. And, I think one of the goals was to help people without bank accounts, right? And, has Bitcoin made it easier, more Salvadorans to access financial services? But I guess also, coming back to that education question and that education element, because at the end of the day, these are just tools, right? I think there is a mindset that needs to come along with using these tools. And it just brings me to with great power comes great responsibility, right? So, I just wanted to maybe expand on, has Bitcoin actually made it easier for more Salvadorans to access financial services?
And for those that have adopted it, the answer is absolutely yes. So, as I mentioned, bank accounts use tends to be very low in many countries in the region and potentially globally. So Bitcoin has really kind of short-circuited that approach, particularly looking at the microfinancing. So, as I mentioned, all of the boom in the businesses around Bitcoin Beach has been driven by, I would say, if I'm being candid, it's more the business adoption of some of these potential financial services rather than the general population. So businesses using the ability to create microfinancing around Bitcoin to drive their businesses. And I think the next step, and you can see from some of the communications that the government's doing, is now to engage a broader section of the population in this ability to innovate and use Bitcoin to create not just bank accounts, but financial inclusion and innovative new products that can help people have a more successful financial life. And again, to come back to the issue of remittances, but also this ability to access credit. It's often underestimated the impact that not being able to access credit creates in an economy that needs to grow, such as El Salvador. So that will be the education process, really, of taking what has been quite considerable success within the business user community and extending that into the broader population. And really, a lot of that is down to very, very hard work from the government side and international organizations too.
Yeah, and what do you think will happen with Bitcoin in El Salvador in the long run? Could other countries start doing the same thing? I mean, everyone's looking at El Salvador, right? Like, how everything is happening and how it's unfolding. Do you think more countries will start adopting the same thing? And I also really like what you kind of mentioned, because it's something that I've heard as well. Buy a Bitcoin a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and again, it's like an apple a day keeps doctor away, right? So.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So absolutely, we can see other countries, and it won't just be developing countries, are developing strategies for Bitcoin and building Bitcoin into their economies. So obviously, everyone's heard about the ETFs that are being set up. I mean, obviously, those benefit developed markets more and allow Bitcoin to become much more of an institutional currency and used to in a much more mainstream way in the future. And in the next 2 or 3 years, that's going to happen in every economy. I don't think it will happen in the same way as every economy. I mentioned that El Salvador was in quite a unique situation in using it to make their dollarized economy more flexible. I think in different markets, you see in Zimbabwe, for example, Zimbabwe is an example of a country that really suffered from hyperinflation and instability. Inflation in the hundreds of thousands of percent. And what they've tried to do is actually use gold. So but attach a digital currency to gold. So a new currency, the experiment that they're trying to help stabilize the economy. So that's a different model from a Bitcoin model, but it's an attempt to try to address this question of global liquidity. And then I mentioned this idea of a new Bretton Woods and trying to use Bitcoin to create a global liquidity and address credit crisis. I think one of the things that will happen potentially in different markets, and we're talking to people in the US, for example, is combining Bitcoin with other assets such as gold, diamonds even, so that you're creating a kind of basket of potentially new economic tools. And I think globally the different countries will adopt different forms of this use of Bitcoin as the new Bretton Woods. El Salvador is probably the most ambitious. If we're looking at it, and as I mentioned, you'll probably be fair to say it's only been a partial success, but at least it shows that it's able to address this question of bringing stability and flexibility in an economy that faces some severe challenges.
Yeah, you brought up quite a few good points. First of all, would you say, the Bitcoin experiment in El Salvador is a success or a failure, right? And how do we measure that? And you were also saying, other countries will adopt, but in a different way, right? So it doesn't always have to be the same thing, but it could look slightly different in practice. And I really love that you said that. So yeah, coming back to the whole, what metrics do we use to see if this experiment is a success or a failure?
So I think one of the key metrics actually is the growth to two things. So there's growth of obviously consumer usage of Bitcoin and adoption. And then secondly, there's the growth of what we refer to as a Bitcoin economy. So that's the use of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to create new economic models. And in both those areas, we've seen considerable success. So for example, 10% of the population, as I say, is using Bitcoin. The goal, clearly, the metric has to be to increase that certainly to a majority of the population. And at that point, you're really going to have, quite a massive and different kind of economy. And there will be some challenges with that too, obviously. But it would be, a huge achievement to achieve that. And then the second metric is really the creation of this Bitcoin economy. So how can businesses use Bitcoin in innovative ways to find new investments, to find new business models, and create a whole, essentially a whole new economy? Now, a part of that is the legal framework. So we mentioned that Bitcoin is obviously the currency, but it is also the legal framework for how do you structure and manage businesses that are running on Bitcoin. So if you think about it, El Salvador is also becoming a global center for a business that might want to have an intelligent legal framework for how do you manage Bitcoin. And call out one company that's caught my eye in this area is a company called Enor, who are actually licensed in El Salvador. And what they do is they provide a blockchain that allows you to create a marketplace and trade in soya. So they have a token called eSoy, for which you are able to transact. Soy is obviously a huge commodity in Latin America, but actually transact without some of the traditional market costs and barriers in soya. And they're also looking to extend that to coffee as well, which is another product that's produced in the region at scale. So what this means is you're really starting to see a whole new economy grow. And, if El Salvador can continue to become this hub of expertise for the legal and institutional systems for managing Bitcoin, then there's potentially a huge opportunity there, particularly not just within the region, but as I mentioned, as the world starts to get more sophisticated in its use of Bitcoin, it can really differentiate itself from other countries that would be very envious of that position. There's a lot of work to be done in that direction, but I think in terms of a metric, it would be a huge success if that were achievable, and a lot of the legal framework has been put in place in that direction.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting, and also I'm just very curious to also track, I guess you could say, how it impacts the people on the ground, right? Like, okay, yeah, opening an account and having more people on Bitcoin or having financial inclusion is considered a success. But how does that really impact the people on the ground, right? How are they using, what's their attitudes towards money, in the long run? I mean, I'm always fascinated to think of how things could affect one thing and another. But anyway, before I digress, if Bitcoin's value drops suddenly and there was a major problem, how do you think El Salvador would handle it, and how might that mean for the country?
So another way of looking at that question is Bitcoin actually is one of the highest performing assets over the last 10 years. And in fact, it's outperformed every other asset. So the question is to look at, in context, how has the dollar performed in that period, just coming back to the analysis. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a big part of this experiment will be this kind of bull run with Bitcoin. And I think one of the issues with the volatility that you're flagging is that, even if it's hugely successful in the next year, and we anticipate, there is further price increase. How do you manage for that decline again? Now, clearly, that one of the issues there is planning, the continued build up the Bitcoin treasury. But this is where some of the further innovation comes with what we're referring to as stable coins, and this idea of further innovation within Bitcoin around this concept of the new Bretton Woods and liquidity. So how can we create a Bitcoin that works in a more stable fashion, and not only grows as it has potential to continue to grow. If there's another bear market, which is always not just likely, but kind of built in almost, there will be another potential bull market, right? So how do you create that stability is one of the key questions I think everyone looking at this new Bitcoin economy is trying to think through. And there's a huge amount of innovation, and one of our products, which Bell 2, which is a layer 2 sort of interconnectivity protocol, looks to try to address the question of how do you create that new liquidity that, as I say, would underpin a kind of new Bretton Woods solution. So the question really is about how do you create that, how do you create more sophistication and stability within that Bitcoin economy and ecosystem. But as I say, over historically in recent times, Bitcoin has offered a good return. It's just a question of how do you manage some of the volatility.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack with this, right? And there's so many things to consider, and I don't think one session covers everything, because there's just so many different elements to think about and how that might look in the long run, and because that touches on human behavior as well, right? And yeah, so I just wanted to see if there's anything else you'd like to add, because obviously there's so much more to unpack with this.
Yeah, I mean, I would again to come back to this idea of innovation and innovation within the Bitcoin economy. And I've kind of tried to avoid going too geeky on some of the technical side of it. But I just wanted to outline one of the products, for example, that tend to are enabled by this system. So one of the products is peer-to-peer lending. So that essentially means that if I hold some Bitcoin, say, or a small amount of Bitcoin, and I need to say, if I'm a Bitcoin node operator or miner, I've got a short-term need for I hold this Bitcoin. I don't want to sell it because I know it's valuable. So these new technologies, these new layer 2 technologies enable, as I say, our product Bell 2 enables you to be able to lock that Bitcoin in keeping it on the Bitcoin network. So you still own it, and go and seek a loan from someone actually on the Ethereum network who would then offer or terms of a loan to that person for a period of time, which is then locked into a smart contract. And that the person, say, who's running their node would then be able to manage the investment they need, say, in creating more a better business, and then repay that loan in a peer-to-peer fashion as the smart contract terms apply. And then at that point, the Bitcoin, which has been locked into a special function of Bitcoin called a script, is released, and both sides of the party are able to, one has made a profit on their directly on being able to lend their Ethereum, USDT, say, as a currency, and the person that needed that loan has kept their asset. I mean, hopefully the Bitcoin has increased in that period of time too, and therefore has been able to invest in their business. So that's a new peer-to-peer model that is incredibly exciting, particularly in these economies where there is such a shortage of credit. So that's an innovation that actually that product already exists and has been launched, and there are products launching all the time in the next 6 months that include insurance, other forms of lending, etc. That again radically change the way that economics can work in many of these markets. So that's really, really exciting. And just coming back to El Salvador within that context, imagine if if they can really play off the fact that they've pioneered the thinking about this Bitcoin economy, as I say, created the legal systems, but also some of the institutional structures, then that opportunity, could be really significant. As I say, we see this as a global trend. So actually Southeast Asia, there's the Token 2049 event next week, which we'll be attending. And actually in Southeast Asia, we see a huge amount of dynamism around this Bitcoin innovation in the Bitcoin economy. And probably that's the area of the world, other than Latin America, that's probably the most advanced in that area of the world. And Latin America is also sort of following close behind.
I mean, the conversations that I've been having with people, to me, I feel like the future is peer-to-peer. Would that be an accurate statement?
Absolutely. The scale, if you imagine the scale, imagine if people could make these peer-to-peer loans, and this is what we're seeing in Southeast Asia. You have a lot of very small businesses, but very innovative, very entrepreneurial businesses in that region. And imagine if you're just able to make completely trusted loans. The model I outlined, you don't have counterparty risk in that loan scenario, and that's a huge reduction in risk from a CFI or centralized finance model. So yeah, if I was going to be really bullish on on Bitcoin and anything, it would definitely be enabling of this peer-to-peer economy. And that's, in terms of the bold and ambitious approach how Salvadors take, that's what, if they can, as I say, create that level of education and level of sophistication and understanding that within their economy, then it's potentially a very bright opportunity.
That's amazing. And Jonathan, was so grateful for your insights into Bitcoin's role in El Salvador. Thank you so much for taking the time to discuss this with us and for breaking it down for us, right? Truly, truly grateful to have you with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a fascinating area, and as you say, we could talk for a long time on it. But I hope that's given a good introduction. And as I say, partial success would be my final verdict, but huge potential, but a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and as you say, education, right? Lots of education to be done. To all our fantastic listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Don't forget to express your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. Thank you for tuning in, and until we meet again, stay well.